Hi everybody, and welcome to part 2 of Concepts in Biology. So we finished part 1 last time, and now we're going to be finishing part 2. So some of these lectures I do try to break up into 2 different sections, because if we were in class, there's no way we'd be able to get through 63 slides in an hour and 5 minutes or whatever we have. So that's why I like to break things down sometimes, especially if it's kind of harder information or stuff that I feel like I really need to go over with you. So that's why we sometimes break these things down. So if you see us, break in the middle of a lecture, that's why we're doing it, that's all. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with part 2 of Concepts in Biology. All right, so what we're going to be talking about from now on is modes of reproduction. So lots of these different organisms that we're going to learn about throughout the semester have different modes of reproduction, including the bacteria and little tiny things like that. And so every living thing does go through some type of reproduction. And that's what we're going to be focusing on. So the different types of reproductions that we have. So the first one is asexual reproduction. So asexual means non-sexual. Okay, so this would be any kind of thing that does not actually sexually reproduce. And that's what you can see right here. So say we have bacteria, right? You would have a parent bacteria right here. They would grow, they would replicate their DNA, and then all they would do is split into what's called daughter cells. And this is basically you're making little tiny copies of yourself. So you're making clones of yourself, which means your DNA is going to be identical from the parents to the offspring. Okay, so this is non-sexual. The whole point of sexual reproduction is to mix mom and dad's genes to make you. Otherwise, we just have be little clones of our parents, and wouldn't that be weird? Okay, so this does not involve any kind of sexual replication or sexual anything, because this is asexual. This is non-sexual. You're just growing and you're replicating your DNA, and then you're making new copies of yourself, like little tiny clones of you. And again, they're genetically identical to the parent cell. Now, there's a couple different ways you can do this, asexual reproduction. One of them is known as fission. And fission essentially is just the splitting up. So that's where you have one and now you have two. That's fission. So if you think of like nuclear fission, you're splitting the atom. What? Yes. Fission is the same kind of thing. You're splitting one organism and now you're turning it to two. That's all. So if we talk about binary fission, that's something that bacteria do. Binary means 2 and fission means the division. So you're dividing from 1 to 2. That's all. Very simple. That's because things like bacteria are very simple. They don't need to, go through all of these different steps, and they don't need to sexually reproduce or do anything like that. They're just going to make new copies of themselves. And that's also why bacteria can reproduce like that, because they're just replicating their own DNA. All right. The next one is budding. So imagine, instead of me making little clones of myself so that I'm now 2 of me, imagine like I grew a little me right here and then like budded him off and then be like, mini copy of me, and I'm like, bye, mini me. How weird would that be? But this is actually something that's really, really common in some invertebrates and plants and stuff. They'll actually just bud off an individual and then send them on their way. So again, genetically identical to the parents, but a new individual has been formed and has been sent on its way. Vegetative reproduction, essentially this is just going to be happening for plants and algae. This is basically where you're just like growing new little parts of you, and then those parts are going to kind of go off, and then you have more you, which is kind of funny. So basically you're sending like underground little root systems of you, and you're just like, I'm going to spread out and move around. That's vegetative reproduction. So that's what we can see right here. We can see some buddings. We can see some vegetative reproductions right here. So this is the roots of it, but he's kind of like shooting a little rhizome off, and then he's going to grow his own new little colony right there. This is a hydra budding. This is something that we would have seen in class that I'm going to hopefully try to get to use somehow, but it's right here. Okay, so we have a little hydra. Okay, and then he's going to create a little mini him on his shoulder, and then boop, he's going to pop the little mini him off, and it's going to go off on its own. So that would be budding right there. And then you can see this right here. All of these are tiny little buds right there. All right, so getting to the fun part, sexual reproduction. Now, I'm going to tell you some crazy things that are going on with these animals and their sexes. And again, most of the time I tell you guys like fun sex facts. You guys always seem to remember the fun sex facts, which is weird. But let's get into some fun sex facts. All right. So, sexual reproduction should not shock you guys. It involves 2 people, organisms, whatever, male and a female typically, and they're going to be getting together and they're going to be producing an offspring that is genetically a combination of the 2 of them. Okay, so it's not genetically the same like the little mini me that I said bye to, that was just me. No, this is now a new combination of alleles to create a new genetically unique individual. Now, when these two organisms get together, they each have gametes, right? Sperm is a gamete, egg is a gamete. You have either one if you're a male or a female. Sometimes you have both if you're a hermaphrodite. And that's what you're going to get together. So you're going to get together two gametes to create what's called a zygote. So the zygote would be a fertilized egg, or the first stages to a baby, right? But before that, when you just have the sperm or the eggs, those are known as gametes. Let's see. This should not shock you guys that ovaries produce eggs and testes produce sperm. Hopefully you pass basic anatomy, even without taking anatomy. You guys should know that one. Okay. All right, so let's talk about how some of these wacky creatures actually do sexual reproduction. This is a fun one. This is known as broadcast spawning. So in this case, we have a pair of individuals that are actually getting together to mate. Sometimes it happens in a lot more than just a pair. There's just a big group of them, and it turns into a frenzy, and everyone's like, ah! So basically what happens is the female's going to be swimming along, the male kind of nudges her and goes, hey, I'm ready. Then she will release her eggs. When she releases her eggs, if he's right there, he will release his sperm, right? So male and female gametes get together, and then now some of the eggs will be fertilized. Great. However, as you can see here, they're just kind of swimming by going, and then they're off. So there is zero parental care when it comes to broadcast spawning. But you're kind of doing like, you're playing a numbers game. So if I release 1 million eggs, maybe 50 of them will survive. And you're like, well, those are really low numbers, but there's also zero parental care, which means these fish, potentially, as soon as they could make more eggs and make more sperm, they can reproduce again. So with very little parental care, it's much easier to have lots and lots and lots and lots of offspring. Right? And then just hope that some of them survive. And numbers game, they will. A few will survive. And then boom, you've had your offspring. Now, we don't do that. We actually take parental care and we gestate and keep our babies inside of us for many, many, many months. But that's why we can really only have like one baby at a time. Right? Or sometimes a small litter if you're talking about like twins or triplets or whatever. But these fishes don't even bother with it. If they're broadcast spawners, they're like, screw it. I'm just going to release and hope for the best. Bye, guys. Hopefully you guys survive because I'm out. I know. But it does seem to work for them. So this, again, is known as broadcast spawning. You're spawning, you're releasing the eggs, but you're just kind of blanketing them and you're broadcasting them on. You're like, I don't know, here, good luck, and you're swimming away. So again, very little parental care, but if you're reproducing in the millions, and this is every time, potentially you could be reproducing and then a month later you're reproducing again, and then a month later you're reproducing again. So imagine if nothing survived in your first batch. Okay, well that's fine, I'll try a second batch and a third batch and a fourth batch. So, numbers game here. You're just trying to, increase the numbers. Again, millions of these gametes need to be released. Only some of them will actually get fertilized. And even less than that will actually survive. I hate to say it, but it's really gross. But lots of organisms wait for broadcast spawners. They're sitting there and they're like waiting. And then all the sperm and eggs get released and they're like, and you're like, gross! There's a lot of energy in those sperm and eggs. And remember, it's all about energy. Everything needs to eat to consume its energy. A lot of energy in sperm and eggs. Gross. Wait till we get to poop. There's a lot of energy in poop, and a ton of organisms eat it. And then you're like, what? Yes. Anyway. So, here is some broadcast spawning pictures. Here we have a little, this is a sponge. And the sponge essentially has just released, because it is a hermaphrodite, it's releasing both its sperm and eggs all at the same time, just kind of releasing. Now, it can self-fertilize. It can do this asexually. But typically what's happening here is they're all releasing their gametes kind of in phase with each other. So if you have one that's just a female, it can release its eggs, say the full moon or a new moon. It depends sometimes, depending on the species. They'll all release at the same time. So you're looking around, there's nothing happening. All of a sudden, all of these sponges start releasing these like clouds, and you're like, what is this? It's gametes, right? They're all releasing it at the same time. It's triggered by tides. It's triggered by currents. It's triggered by the moon. But they don't have brains. They don't have eyes. They don't have anything. And they just know, we're going to release all at the same time. Because if she releases right now, nobody else releases, her eggs are going to float around unfertilized. None of them are going to grow. That doesn't do her any good. So it always does them the best good to all time their reproduction. That's why the fishes, the male's poking at the female, going, hey, I'm ready. Let's do this. So when she releases her eggs, the male's right there to fertilize. Because we're in seawater, people. These things are going to float away. So you need to make sure you fertilize them right away and then hope for the best that they actually survive. And that's what you can see right here. Remember, I told you that sometimes they do it in pairs, sometimes they do it in a whole group, right? So this whole group will get together and they all kind of get frantic, and then one releases and they're all like, ah! They just go all release and then swim away. And they're like, all right, I'm done. Yeah, very anticlimactic, literally, but really effective, because if all of these different individuals are releasing their sperm and their eggs at the exact same time, all of those are going to get fertilized. Now, remind you, fish are kind of dumb sometimes. And sometimes they'll turn around, they'll release their eggs and be like, ooh, eggs. And then they'll turn around and they'll start eating their own babies. Crazy. We're going to talk about that too. So many fun things to talk about. Oh, I'm so excited for you guys. All right. So again, timing is important. Timing is everything. You need to release them all at the same time. If you don't, you're not going to get fertilized. And the whole point is to get fertilized, or to fertilize an egg if you're a male gamete. So the water, temperature, the moon, the currents, the tide, all of that kind of like ties into it. And what exactly triggers it, we don't 100% sure know. But we do know that these environmental cues typically are the ones that kind of trigger this release, and therefore everything kind of releases at the same time and then optimizes reproduction. All right, let's see. If you are not... Still recording? Okay, just kidding. Notification. All right. If you are not a broadcast spawner, meaning you're not releasing just millions and hundreds of eggs and just good luck, you're probably going to do internal fertilization, and that's what mammals do, right? We gestate our babies. We care for them internally for months as they develop. Okay? Because also those fish that just broadcast spawned, now their little fertilized egg is just an egg floating around in the big ocean, and it's probably going to get eaten. Let's be fair, that egg has zero defenses, and it's just at the mercy of the currents floating around. Okay, so we don't bother with that. We say, no, we're going to protect our embryo as it's developing. We're going to protect it until it can survive on its own when we actually release it outside of us. Okay, so this does require contact between the male and the female. Unlike them just swimming next to each other and going and then swimming away, this actually does require what's called copulation, or physical sexual activity. Now, it's not always fun and games like you might think, because humans are very different than most other animals. In fact, most of the time, this can be actually really nasty. And I don't mean like nasty. I mean like nasty. Like ripping off arms, biting huge bites, and getting crazy here. So right here you can see a male and a female octopus. Now, one of the male's arms is actually what's known as a hectocotylus, or a kind of penis. And so it kind of like playing Russian roulette. No, just kidding. So that basically what he's going to do is he's going to insert his tentacle into a little hole by her head, because she doesn't have a head, and that's going to be where she basically fertilizes her eggs. Now, sharks do it a little bit different. Now, imagine if you were near something. I mean, these guys have arms, and they can actually grab onto each other and do their copulation. But imagine if you're a fish in the water, and then you kind of bump a fish, and then you're just going to float away from each other. So sharks have come up with an interesting way to get around this, where the male shark just bites the female really hard and holds onto her. Yeah, sounds great for the female, right? No, sounds terrible. Luckily, she has developed a way around this. In fact, what she will do is she will actually start padding herself up or bulking up a little bit during reproductive season. So what she's doing is she's adding that extra layer of fat, insulation, so that when he bites her all over the place to hold her down and do his little shark thing, he's not going to hurt any of her internal organs. So when she bulks up, that now gives a protection layer, so when his teeth don't start ripping into her organs and she dies from reproduction. She's not going to die from reproduction because she kind of bulks up beforehand. So yes, it is kind of brutal. Yes, she gets scars all over her and totally bitten, because hello, look at those teeth right there. But it doesn't kill her. So again, she's still able to internally fertilize, have those babies, and then pup off a litter of her pups. All right, now we're going to get into the kind of the wacky ones. So, hermaphrodites have male and female parts. Now, there are different types of hermaphrodites. Some can be what's called simultaneous hermaphrodites, meaning you have male and female parts at the same time. And some of them, they can be what's called sequential hermaphrodites, meaning you start off your life as a female and you end up a male, or vice versa. Okay, so there's different reasons why you would want to do this, but typically when you are a hermaphrodite, you do have both male and female parts. Here's an amazing little guy. This is known as a plesia. This is the California sea hare, very common off our coast. You can find them. They get about to be the size of a football, and they are called sea hares because they have these cute little antennas and this big old round body and this cute little tail back at the end. Now these guys are like, oh, it's like a sea bunny. How cute. These guys are nasty, and I do mean nasty because these guys have orgies. Yes, you heard that right. Straight up orgies. Because they are hermaphrodites, they have male and female parts at the same time. They're simultaneous hermaphrodites. So what they do is they get one line up, and then they get one behind him who fertilizes him, and then one behind her who fertilizes him, and one behind them who fertilizes. They can form sex rings. They can form giant sex clumps. Just like I said, like orgies. And you're like, well, wait a minute. This slug-looking guy, who is a relative of the slug, has orgies? Yes. Absolutely crazy, because they are simultaneous hermaphrodites. So, when one individual is fertilizing another's eggs, he's getting his eggs fertilized behind him. So in case, he actually reproduces twice. He fertilizes eggs, and he gets his eggs fertilized. Yeah, so super beneficial to these guys, because now they get to reproduce twice as efficiently. Okay, so actually really, really good. And again, they're basically slugs. They're not the most intelligent things in the world. They're related to clams. So there's not a lot going on there. So there's not a lot of love lost between these guys. They're just there to fertilize. Because I'll tell you what, when it comes to biology, the main point of biology is reproduction. And that's just from a biological standpoint. I'm not saying go out and have a bunch of babies, right? But I'm just saying the point of life really, when you come to biologically speaking, is to have babies. So these guys are killing it because of orgies and sex rings. I know. Fun sex facts, guys. You're never going to forget this guy. Aplysia, California sea hare. I don't know what happened here. Oh, hello. Oh, I missed the joke. All right. Well, spoiler alert. I do have a joke for you guys. Who has the world's largest penis relative to body size? This guy. This guy's a barnacle. You guys have been to the intertidal zone. You've been to a beach. You've seen a barnacle. They look like miniature volcanoes that are about this big. World's largest penis relative to their body size. And that is because, imagine if you're this guy right here. Let's pick this guy right here. Right? This is his entire body. His whole body. Think of us. Right? But his neighbor is all the way over here. So these guys are also hermaphrodites. So they do have male parts and female parts at the same time. So if he needs to reproduce with this one over here, his penis actually has to come up out of his house, go out the front door, down the street, knock on his neighbor's door, and then go in his house. Yeah. So that's again why the barnacle has the world's largest penis relative to body size. You have to include the relative to body size. That's essentially like being a human with, I don't know, like a 15-foot penis. Yeah. Crazy. Crazy. So again, if you want to trick your friends, you can always ask them fun facts. Who's got the world's largest penis relative to body size? The barnacle. And this is exactly what you can see right here. So this is the entire body. This is known as Ciri. Not like, hey Siri, can you help me? But like Ciri, C-I-R-R-I. And yes, you will need to know that coming up. And they basically filter feed. So these have little feathers, and they're just kind of holding them out. And they're trying to grab food as it goes by. But look at this guy. He's like the size of his house and then 2 or 3 times bigger. So this is his penis right here because he's looking for his neighbor. His penis is out walking the neighborhood, knocking on doors. I know, guys. This is like our second lecture, and we're already having this much fun with fun sex facts and huge penises. I know. But it's biology, and there's some crazy stuff going on in the ocean. I know. It's just the beginning to a fun semester. I hope you guys are enjoying as much as I am. All right. So remember how I told you that there is sequential hermaphrodites and simultaneous hermaphrodites. So simultaneous hermaphrodites are boys and girls at the same time. Sequential hermaphrodites are boy then girl or girl then boy. Okay, so let's start with the first one. So if you are a protandry, pro meaning first, or tandry or andy, that's how I always remembered it, you're first male. So protandry, you were born a male, and then eventually at some point in your life you will transition to female. Okay? Now if you're protogyny, right, then you're born a female first, and then eventually will transition to a male. So a classic example of the protogyny is actually the California sheephead that we have off our coast. They get pretty big. The males will get pretty big, and they kind of have this like dumpy underbite. It's because they're crushing like shells and stuff, but they kind of look like they're missing a few teeth, and maybe they're wearing overalls and playing the banjo, if you know what I mean. So they're a little dumpy jawed and kind of funny looking, but every single one of them is born a female. Then a male, whatever large male is in the area, he controls all the females in his area. It's called a harem. One male controls all the females. So that one male will reproduce with all of those females. So he's killing it. Meanwhile, all the females are like, hey, I'm getting good DNA over here because he's a large male, he's healthy, and he reproduces a lot, so I'm getting good genes. Now, when things like predation happen, or maybe fishing, and somebody comes and removes that large male from the population, the largest female will then transition over and become a male. So you'll see some of these like mid-transition females that kind of have this like darker pattern, because the females are like pink or gray, and the males have a very dark black head, a bright red stomach, and a black tail. So you'll see the females that are kind of almost like starting to transition, but the male prevents them from doing so. And he doesn't go, hey, don't do that. It's just a biological thing. It's just a trigger that basically happens from these fish. And so they realize, oh, the male's gone. Who's going to reproduce with me? The largest female's like, I am. And then she transitions over and becomes a male. So she's producing eggs her whole life, reproducing her offspring, and then she's producing sperm the rest of her life, reproducing offspring. So again, just like that sea hare we learned about, she's winning. She's winning twice over because we have, again, 2 different types of reproduction. You're able to do it both ways. And therefore, you're able to reproduce a lot more than you would have if you were just a female. What if all the males were gone? There's nothing but females, then everything would die off. So that transition is actually really, really useful. So protandry, first male, then female. Protogyny, first female, then male. Sequential hermaphrodites, one then the other. All right, let's talk about evolution for a minute. All right, evolution. So evolution is something that some people don't understand. Hopefully you've taken biology and you do understand the concept of it. Because my favorite is when I hear people say, like, well, if evolution is real, we came from monkeys, then why don't all the monkeys in the zoos turn into people? That is, like, not even close to how that works. So again, those people who typically don't understand evolution, don't believe in evolution, is probably because they don't understand evolution. That's not how it works. I am not evolving. You are not evolving. I'm so sorry. As a population, we are evolving. And evolution is not some big, scary, I wonder if it's happening kind of thing. It's not. In fact, we can see it happening all the time. You know, the average human height has increased in the last couple hundred years and has been for a while. We know people were shorter back in the day. You think cowboys, like the average height for a male was like 5'6". I think now it's like 5'8". That's only a couple hundred years ago, right? So literally we're just increasing in height. So evolution just means changes over time, usually small changes that accumulate over time. Okay, the giraffe had a short neck at one point, but in the population there's natural variation, meaning some had shorter necks, some had slightly longer necks. Think about human height, right? Slightly variation. Well, the giraffe, who happened to have the longest neck, was able to reach trees that nobody else could, which means he got lots of food, which means he was nice and healthy, which means he was able to have lots of babies. His babies had also long necks. Then babies with long necks reproduced with other babies with long necks, and now we have giraffes. It's really not rocket science. It's just small changes over time. Okay, so evolution is very, very happening. Changes after generation after generation after generation. So evolution happens at the population level. Okay, the population as a whole is evolving. Individuals don't evolve, which is why monkeys can't just turn into people. That's not how that works. Okay, we're talking, in that case, millions of years of evolution, and the smartest ones reproducing with the smartest ones, and then the tallest ones reproducing with the blah, 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 blah. And this is how we turned out to be us. And yes, we are related to chimpanzees, about 98%. What? I know, crazy. Okay, so again, we have population changes, the genetic makeup, or things like phenotypes, like how tall your neck is, right? How tall you are. Those are just phenotypes. It's all just based on your genetics. Those will increase over time. And we don't really always know which way it's going to go. We don't know how evolution is going to happen. That's based on natural selection. So at the time, the trees were very tall and the giraffes couldn't reach the trees. So whoever had the longest neck could reach some trees and then could get food. Now instantly that doesn't mean that all the shorter necked giraffes are going to die off like that. It just means slowly there's going to be less short necked giraffes and more tall necked giraffes until eventually there's just tall necked giraffes. That's evolution. And it just so happens that at the time, longer necks were being naturally selected for. It's not nature going, yeah, you, yeah, you, yeah, no, not you. No, it's just based on, at that moment in time, who had the best traits to survive. The long-necked giraffe was able to get the trees. That's it. He was able to eat. That's all. And now we have long-necked giraffes. Okay, so subtle, small changes over time can accumulate and become larger changes. That's evolution. Okay? Yeah, and usually what's happening here is whatever trait you had allowed you to survive better. The giraffe got more food, right? I don't know, I tell humans would survive better, but we do, I guess. So, like, the fastest swimming fish, right, would be able to get all the food that he wants because he's really fast. He's faster than everybody else. So now we have fast fish because they're the ones who can get the food, right? Smart organisms, anything that's smart, like an octopus, very, very smart. They survive because they're smart enough to be able to catch their food. So that's why we have octopuses and stuff like that. And yes, it is octopuses. It's not octopi because it's Greek-based. It's not Greek-based. It's Latin-based. So octopi would be a Greek-based word, but octopus is a Latin-based word, so you'd say octopuses. I know, kind of awkward to say, which is why everybody says octopi, including me. I slip up every once in a while. Anyway, all right. So, again, variation happened in the population. You had some short, you had some tall, you had some slow swimmers, you had some fast swimmers, but for whatever reason, that particular trait allowed them to survive better. Because they can survive better, they get enough food, which means they're not starving, they're not dying off, they're avoiding predators, which means they're going to have more babies. Those babies are then going to have that trait, right? If it's not heritable, then it can't be evolution, right? If you get a tattoo, you're not going to pass that tattoo on to your kids. That's not heritable, right? But if your, genetics make you tall, your kids are probably going to be tall. Okay, so if that allows you to survive better, then your kids are also going to have that trait. They're also going to survive better. And that's why the population will shift from the ones who can't really survive so good to now it's pretty much just the population of the ones who can survive well. And again, there's going to be variations in that population as well. That's what drives natural selection, and that's what drives evolution. It's just variation in the population. If this isn't enough for you, go see my evolution lecture. Yes, it's on my YouTube page, and we can talk all about it and Darwin and all that fun stuff. Okay. So again, this is natural selection. Natural selection does occur on the individual level. Okay, so the population is evolving, but natural selection occurs on the individual. That individual happened to have a long neck. That individual happened to be a fast swimmer. That individual happened to be tall. I don't know. Right? So natural selection occurs on the individual level. That trait that you had, the tall, the fast, the whatever, that is allowing you to survive better. So it is positively selected for. If it was negatively selected for, that means it's not allowing you to survive better. In fact, it's probably going to be the thing that kills you, and therefore would be negative to you and negatively selected for, meaning it'd probably end up out of the population, because if everyone's dying from it, nobody's going to be able to reproduce. That's not going to get passed on. Hopefully that makes sense to you. If it does not, you can always email me, ask me any questions that you guys have, or go see my evolution lecture. I give you plenty of examples on this. All right. So natural selection, especially positive natural selection, is going to, actually even including negative natural selection, because that's going to kind of weed out the weak ones. So that's what it means by survival of the fittest. Guess what? It's not talking about how strong you are, how fast you are. It's talking about how many babies you can have, right? The fastest one is going to be able to get all the food and avoid the predators, which means it's going to have more babies. Okay? You're fit if you have babies. Fitness is a measure of how many offspring you have. If you have lots of offsprings, you are considered very fit. If you don't have any offsprings, you're not considered fit at all. You have zero fitness. Okay, so it's never about survival of the fittest. It's survival of the fittest. Now, typically, that does relate to, okay, the strongest do survive. Yeah, that is true. The strongest, the fastest, in this case, the giraffe, the tallest. But again, that's happening on the individual level. So that random trait does happen to get passed on more because you're the one who survived. If you're negatively selected for, you're probably going to die. You're not going to have any offspring, which means your fitness is going to be zero. So if you are fit, it's because you've had lots of babies, because you have some trait that allows you to survive better than other organisms. And that's the important part. So you're going to use that word differently the next time. You're like, survival of the fittest. You're like, oh, fitness, babies. All right. Taxonomy. This is the thing that I was warning you guys about in the semester that's actually the hardest part of the class. So taxonomy is the grouping of organisms based on their relatedness. So I told you the octopus is related to the clam. They're all in the phylum Mollusca. Okay, that means everything in Mollusca is more closely related to any other phylum. So like arthropods, like crabs, are not closely related to mollusca because they're in two totally different phylums. They're in two totally different groups. That's what we're talking about when we talk about taxonomy. And usually we go from very, very big groups like domains, like the domain prokaryote. Those are all your bacteria. The domain eukaryote. That's all your plants, your animals, and your funguses, and everything else on the planet. Those are big, right? Then you go down to the kingdom, say Animalia, right? You can go down to the phylum Chordata. That's us. You can go down to the class Mammalia, right? So now we're getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until you actually get to the species. That would be like Homo sapiens, like us, which is actually your scientific name. Homo sapiens is actually a combination of your genus and your species. So Homo is our genus and sapiens would be our species. All right, so the largest, starting with domain. It goes domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Remember, species is the absolute smallest. If we're talking about species of cheetahs, I don't know why I'm talking land animals all day today if it's a marine biology class, but we're just talking cheetahs. We're not talking all felines like your house cat and your tigers and we're just talking cheetahs. But if we're talking about the domain eukaryote, we're talking every single eukaryotic cell on the planet. Okay, all the plants, all the animals, all the funguses, all the, protists, all of them fall under that domain. So this is the most inclusive, meaning has the most number of different animals. Species is the least inclusive because there's only one species. You can't have multiple species of cheetahs, but each species that's it. That just completes their group. So when we talk about a population, you're just talking about a species. The population of dogs, all dogs are canines. They're all the same species. Even though they're different breeds and they look different, they're all the exact same species. Same thing with house cats. All house cats are under the same species. Okay? Then you have different species of birds and fish and all that kind of stuff, but a population would just be a group of the same species. Important to remember. Okay. So, for example, let's do us. We have the domain Eukarya, the kingdom Animalia, the phylum Chordata, the class Mammalia, the order Primates, the family Hominidae, the genus Homo, the species, again, includes the genus and the species, so Homo sapiens. That's a little confusing. Okay? If we look at dolphins, guess what? Dolphins are also mammals, which means they're also Eukarya, Animalia, Chordata, and Mammalia. But we differ here in the orders. So they are the order Cetacea, where we are the order Primates. So that's where our groups break off. Yes, we are both mammals. Very similar when it comes to all of those other groups, but then we break off. They are cetaceans, Delphinidae, Tursiops, and then Tursiops trunicus. Okay, that's the actual bottlenose dolphin. So again, the more groups that you have in common, the more closely related you are. So if we were talking about, say, a spinner dolphin, maybe they would be in the genus Tursiops, but they're not the same species. So yes, they're both dolphins. They're very, very closely related, but they wouldn't be considered the same population. Okay? Populations are the same species. Species can only reproduce with itself. Bottlenose dolphins can only reproduce with bottlenose dolphins. Humans can only reproduce with humans. Even though we're 98% related to chimpanzees, we cannot reproduce with them. Different species. Unfortunately, this burst the bubble on mermaids. Not only are they different species, which means we can't reproduce, that's the definition of a species, a reproducing group of organisms, but they're not even in the same phylum. I mean, they are in the same phylum, but they're not in the same class, right? So we're all chordata, yeah, but they're like osteichthyes, meaning the bony fishes, and we're mammalia, not even the same thing. So, sorry, mermaids can't exist. I know, bummer. It'd be so cool if they could, but they can't. All right, so we have millions of different animals in the entire world, and if we're in China talking about a specific bird, and we're in the United States talking about the same bird, and we speak two different languages, how do you know we're working on the same animal? Well, this is why we go to those Latin-based names, like the genus and species that makes up the scientific name, right? That's your scientific name because it's Latin. It's a universal language. Everybody will now know, oh, you're talking about the same type of bird. We're not talking about two different birds. We're talking about the same type of bird. So you always use a scientific name. And that's all part of taxonomy and all this kind of stuff. So it's basically a way to talk about these organisms and how they're related to one another. Yes, we're in the same class. We're all in the class Mammalia, but we're in different orders. So we are different. And then you break down and go farther and farther down to see how exactly you are different. And so we can kind of group these organisms based on their relatedness, and then we can talk about things like evolution, right? How did we get hippos? Well, they're actually related to whales. Yeah, they're in a close group with whales. And so just imagine a hippo is just a I can't say skinnier whale, because they're both kind of round. But they use their forelimbs and stuff like that. And so we didn't have that when it comes to whales. And I believe it actually was the other way around. I think we had hippos first, and then we got whales. Because ancient whales had hip bones and little legs, but they ended up losing them, and then they ended up modifying them into flippers. Super cool stuff, guys. And we can watch evolution happen via the fossil record and stuff like that. So super cool stuff. All right. What else? So the biological species concept, that basically just means a species is a group of related organisms that can interbreed. Okay? Now, we have plenty of species of plants, we have species of animals, we have all this kind of stuff. The only thing we don't really, that doesn't fall under this biological species concepts, are things that don't reproduce. So we talked about interbreeding organisms, meaning a species. Well, what about bacteria? Bacteria reproduce asexually. So technically, we don't have any species of bacteria. We have types of bacteria. We have strains of bacteria. We have stuff like that, but they're not technically considered species. Now, we also don't know who is able to reproduce with who when it comes to things like extinct animals. Nobody went back in time and was like, yep, the T-Rex only reproduced with the T-Rex, so it must be its own species. We can't quantify that. And therefore, extinct animals also do not fall under this biological species concept. So only living animals and only animals that interbreed. So if you're asexual, you can't be quantified as a species. Because the definition of a species is a group of interbreeding animals. Okay. Now, phylogenetics. Again, this is along with taxonomy, we're grouping these things based on their relatedness. So phylogeny is how related you are to other organisms. So in this case, we would take the hippo and the whale and say, the dolphin and then humans, because we're all mammals, and we would try to basically make what's called a phylogenetic tree. Or you can think of kind of like a tree of life that branches off and see, all right, I think hippos came first, and then there was whales, and then there was dolphins, and then there was people, right? We're just guessing at this point, but we can guess based on things like morphology. We can base on things like DNA. Like, again, we ran the chimpanzee DNA, and it's almost exactly ours, so we know we gotta be closely related. We can also look at fossil records, like the whales with the hip bones. Okay, if whales never lived on land, why do they have hip bones? Okay? So we can look at all of that, and these are all evidence to help us kind of piece together the mystery of the phylogeny. Now, as we learn things, like especially with technology and genetics and stuff like that, we're like, oh man, what I thought was really, sorry, I keep notifications, I should turn those off. What I thought was closely related because they look alike are actually not closely related because of the DNA. So phylogeny is actually changing all the time the more that we learn. We're like, oh man, I thought the manatee and the hippo were like this, but no, it's like this. The manatee and the cow are closely related. Stuff like that. And these are all just examples that I'm throwing out. But we look at things like the structure, reproductive patterns, embryology is basically like how you develop. The longer you develop in the same stages, probably the more closely related you are. Fossil records, behaviors, DNA, stuff like that. All of these are kind of evidences that we use to basically piece together this unknown puzzle. Nobody was there back in the day and able to witness reptiles and birds coming from dinosaurs. But based on all this, this evidence that we look at, we can say, okay, well, they do have similar DNA, and they do have similar embryology, and they do have similar fossil records, and they do have similar morphologies, and they must be similar. So all of this is just evidence to help support things like evolution, which is just change over time. Okay? So maybe we had dinosaurs, and then they kind of branch off to like flighted feathered dinosaurs, and those eventually became reptiles and birds, which is what happened. How cool is that? Next time you look at a chicken, you're going to be like, you're a dinosaur. It's true. Okay. All right. So here's that phylogenetic tree that I was talking about, and here's how you read them. Okay, the bottom, or the left-hand side, sometimes they're turned on the side, the left-hand side or the bottom is always going to be the oldest. Okay, so this is what's called a common ancestor, meaning we don't know what this animal was. It's extinct. It doesn't exist now. But we do know that they were all related somehow. So in this case, we're looking at echinoderms. That's the phylum Echinodermata, which we are going to go over in detail. These are your sea stars, your sea urchins, stuff like that. So they are all some common ancestor. Okay, so they all have related traits. And what you do is you basically separate or group them out by their traits. And you can do this in a number of ways, and they're not necessarily wrong. Okay, so we look at this and we say, okay, these all have what's known as pentaradial symmetry, except this guy. So, all right, I mean, he does, but in its own way. So maybe he's the different one. So he was the first one to branch off and be different. Now these guys all have pentaradial symmetry, okay. But these two have specifically, 5 radiating points. Okay, they look a little bit different, which is why they have 5 radiating points, which puts them on the same branch, but this guy has his arms all connected, where this guy has his arms separate around a central disc. So that's what makes them different, hence their branch. So here we go. You could say, pentaradial symmetry would go like right here, meaning everything after that has pentaradial symmetry. Now we branch off here, meaning these two are closely related, but they're still different from each other. Okay, so now this guy comes off and he's got all these spines, so that makes him different than everybody else. And then this guy, he's all sorts of different. Okay, but they all have this common ancestor with, say, a water vascular system. So as you move your way down, you're basically separating them off by the characteristics that some of them have or none of them have. So like this guy looks totally separate, so he would be the out group. He'd be the first one off on his own. Now we are going to practice this in class, so don't worry about it if you don't totally get it. But there's not always wrong ways or right ways to do this. Again, we don't know exactly how this happened. We don't know the steps that this is happening in. So in this tree, we basically see that the C stars, right, the C stars and the brittle stars are very closely related because they're almost identical, except there's little differences. However, you could also draw it like this, meaning the C star and the brittle star are very different. Well, they're still close to each other, so they're still closely related, but maybe they're not as closely related as this tree shows. Which one of these is correct? We don't know. It all, especially with this, it's almost like an art form. It's almost how you decide that you want to separate these traits out is how it's going to affect your tree. So you don't always know how it's going to affect your tree. And there's not wrong. You could also switch these two. Okay, say you put the sea cucumber over here and the sea urchin over here. That's not wrong. It's all how you decided to do it. So it's almost like I said, like an art form. And with that, we end Concepts of Biology, and I always love to leave you guys with a terrible dad joke, so when you see it, you go, yay, we're done, and I can turn her off now. Anyway, you guys have all these videos if you ever want to go back and rewatch any of them. I know I talk really, really fast, but luckily for you, you can pause me and you can rewind me. So you guys have all the information that you guys need. Make sure that you guys are studying each week. I will see you guys next week for Seawater Part 1. Anyway, have a wonderful week, and I will see you guys soon. Any questions, go ahead and just email me.